Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traverse of the Stars podcast. How are my loyal listeners? Thank you for your continued support. And as always, hit that subscribe button, everybody. We have an amazing show for you because aboard the mothership is Mark Russell. He's one of the talents behind the Incal Universe from the Humanoids Publishing. Now come join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Russell. Thank you so much for coming to the Traverse of the Stars podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's totally my pleasure, sir. So I always like to start with the question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comic books and who are your earliest influences?
Well, I think my most formative early influence in comics has to be Mad Magazine. It was the first comic book that I picked up regularly off the newsstand. The only comic book to this day I had a subscription to monthly. And I think it just sort of warped my sensibility from a very early age. And even when I'm not writing funny satirical comics, I think the thing that I really took from Mad Magazine is that, the ideal length for a short story is about 3 or 4 pages. And their philosophy of getting to the point and don't take 2 panels to say what you can say in one.
So when did you move into, I guess, superhero comic books?
Well, I think I wasn't really interested in superhero comics until the 90s. I had a friend of mine in college who turned me on to Martha Washington Goes to War and V for Vendetta and Sandman, which was, just mind blowing because they're so much different than the comics I had remembered from when I was a kid. And it's sort of at some point in my progressions just sort of dismissed, but all I really knew about comics before then were, the Mighty Mouse and, Little Lulu comics that were in the magazine racks. So it was kind of mind blowing to see how the left turn that the whole medium had taken. And yeah, I think that was always probably my most formative influence in terms of the serious superhero and sort of more philosophical comics were the sort of pioneering existential comics of the 90s, like Sandman and Frank Miller
it's amazing
stuff.
the amount of people who do reference Neil Gaiman, Sandman, and I would say that's what for me that was like one of the seminal books that I read growing up. Not growing up, but I guess I think it was my late teens. But so I guess I don't know, I'm old now, so it's still growing up, young. But that was an amazing work, and I think it did tell me, I think the same thing, which is I didn't know comic books could do that or be that. So when you moved into writing, did you think as well that you wanted to write stuff that people would be going, I didn't know you could?
Yeah, I think that I benefited somewhat from my own ignorance. I didn't really know how to write a comic book. I was not somebody who had been struggling for years to get into the comic industry and had written a ton of comic book scripts. I had actually written a couple of books about the Bible, strangely enough. And that was that was my publishing experience for getting into comics. And so I came into comics as an ingenue, not really knowing what you were supposed to or couldn't do, which in a way sort of helped inform my voice, because then I just put what sounded like right to me, what sounded like something I wanted to say, not really worrying about whether or not this is how this worked within the comics medium. And, my better moments, I still don't think about it that way. I still don't worry about whether or not this makes a good comic. I just sort of concentrate on whether or not this is true to what I
right now you're working with a team of writers in, I guess it's called the Incal Universe. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Incal Universe.
Yeah. Or Incal is, I think, how they say a la Francais. Yeah.
So it's a universe created by, I'm going to get the name totally wrong, Alejandro Jodorowsky. Oh, that was close. Not too bad. And Moebius.
Jodorowsky.
So what did these stories and creators mean to you? I mean, were these stories that you were reading growing up that you were interested in? Were these, or at least the creative people who were fascinated? Or did you get to learn that when you joined up with the Incal Universe?
Oh no, I was well aware of the Incal Universe before this opportunity came up, and huge admirer of both Moebius and Jodorowsky. Big fan of Jodorowsky's movies, and so and to me, his work is just a level. It has a gear of creativity like almost nobody else on the planet has. So it was not only an honor to be able to work on this series, but also a real challenge because I knew that whatever I did with it, it had to be among the most creative stuff I've ever written. Otherwise, it's just going to seem pedestrian compared to Jodorowsky
So
and Moebius.
with that kind of pressure, did you find was it like suffocating or was it inspiring?
No, I am lucky in the sense that I almost always find that sort of pressure inspiring. I'm somebody who does not feel threatened by the fact that there's so many more brilliant people than myself working out there. I find it absolutely awe-inspiring, and what a lucky thing for the rest of us that is true. That there are people doing way more creative, way more interesting things than I am, and it would be a nightmare to live in any other kind of world. So, yeah, that kind of pressure I find always inspiring, and I think it makes me better than I would be without it. As opposed to like commercial or marketing pressures, which are a very different ball of wax and always a sort of soul deadening. Creative pressures, I think, almost always make
the comics are being published by Humanoids Comic Books, which is a great publisher. How did you get involved with Humanoids and getting onto this project, and what excited you about the possibility of doing it?
Well, and that was another thing that really sort of got me interested in this, was that Mark Waid was the one who approached me to do this, because he was the editor-in-chief, I think he still is, at Humanoids Comics, and approached me specifically to do a spinoff of the Incal. And so I'm a big fan of his work. I think Invincible is one of the greatest, probably 2 or 3 greatest superhero comics ever written, up there with like The Watchmen for me. So I was really gratified that he personally thought of me when they decided they want to do a spinoff of the Incal. But yeah, I just have nothing but respect and admiration for the way they do comics, because they do things that are idiosyncratic, really smart, and just sort of exist on their own terms. They don't fit within a format. Their format is, we'll tell the best story you can, and we'll
what did
make
that do
it
for your
work.
confidence when Mark Waid comes to you and goes, "I want you involved"? I mean, that's a hell of. I mean, he's one of the legends of comic books.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that was really moving, and still one of the high points in my career as a comic book writer. But then with that comes the challenge. It's like, well, this better be good. Right. But luckily I try to like tell myself that whenever I write anything, I'm not a very good mercenary. I'm not somebody who like, oh sure, you hire me, I'll shoot off a few comics and then I'll go move on with my life. It's like I kind of only take writing projects if I feel like I can really get obsessed over them. If I can really just sort of stew over them and make them a part of my life for however long I'm working on them. That's the way I prefer to work. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like that creative pressure works so well for me, because it's like it shows me what is possible, and then just leaves me alone in a room to with my own mind and soul to figure out how I would do this, how I would.
It must be like Don in the Cape. It gives you, like Superman, the movie, like when he gives him the suit and the cape, you're like, you're now Superman. I mean, to have that baton handed to you by Like I said, must have been good, a good feeling. What did he tell you about what he expected from you within the Incal universe?
Not much. I mean, he did say that there was going to be obviously the continuity police that were going to keep me in in between the gutters for the series, which I'd read the Incal and I love the Incal, but there are people who are much more obsessed and intricately and intimately familiar with the Jodorowsky than I am, even though I'm a fan. And so I weirdly, I kind of needed that, but And normally I find that really sort of stultifying when an editor is like, no, you can't do this because we need to keep it in continuity, and no, you can't do this something even though this is more interesting just because it violates what we've done before. But the Incalverse was so creative and outlandish before that when they came to me with something, it almost always made the story better. So it made me like I had to work within these constraints that are even crazier than the constraints.
Working within continuity is obviously challenging because, once again, if you have a good idea for a story, and you can tell me if this has happened, where you have an idea for the story, but once again, continuity runs up against going, can't do that because that's out of this continuity, or you can't quite tell the story this way because of this issue. How do you navigate that? And were there times where it affected what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, with this comic in particular, it did affect a lot of what I wanted to do. But I feel like my philosophy is always just write what you're going to write, tell the best story you can, and then worry about that stuff later. If they say this isn't going to work, or if, this it changes something really common, like a pillar of the original series too much, then I will dial back. But I always feel like it's their job to sort of rein me in, and it's just my job to tell the most interesting story.
The comic book you are working on through the Incal Universe is Psychoverse, correct? So that exists as part of the interlocking universe of the Incal Universe. How firmly entwined are all these series to one another? And as a reader, are you able to read one Psychoverse independently of the others? Did you need the others to make Psychoverse, fully understood?
Yeah, what I wanted to do is make it so this can be read completely independently of the Incal. You don't need to know anything about the Incal to read this comic and enjoy it. But it does tie in heavily to the Incal. So if you have read the Incal, which I imagine most people reading this comic will have, you will appreciate how it explains some of the things that come up in the Incal, or how it sort of dovetails into the story that Jodorowsky and Moebius did. So I think it's perfectly fine to read it without having read the Incal. But if you have read it, you're going to get
two of the other writers. You have Brendan Thomas and you have Dan Waters, who are both awesome writers, awesome people. How did you guys? Are you guys working together? You meet with each other to kind of map it out, or is there communication between each other's titles on what you're doing in your own work?
No, I mean, I have nothing but respect for those writers, but yeah, we didn't really collaborate on these. We wrote, at least I didn't. I wrote mine completely in my own silo. It didn't even know that they were going to be involved until later.
Can you give our listeners a little bit of a pitch for Psychoverse and how it ties into the larger universe of Incal?
Sure. Yeah, the Psychoverse is asked the question, or I guess it creates another portion of the universe which hitherto did not exist, a universe of pure psychoenergy where everything that has not been yet invented lives, and everything goes when it is destroyed. So sort of like an afterlife and also a before life for concepts and people and objects. And it's about how the Psychoverse decides it's time to destroy, or to destroy the Matterverse once the Incal is stolen. So it ties into like sort of the central premise of the first of the Incal, in that the Incal shows up, the Dark Incal shows up, and it creates all this mayhem. And this is like another sort of layer of mayhem that created, in that the Psychoverse decides it's finally time to get rid of the Matterverse because they're endangering us all.
That sounds absolutely awesome.
So it's based on Schopenhauer's idea that the universe of thoughts and feelings and spirit exists just as real as our universe, and that human consciousness exists as the conduit between these two very real universes: the universe of things and objects, and the universe of thoughts.
I really like the idea, and that actually sounds, once again, unique. I don't think I know another story that has anything close to that. So, it seems you found you found a story that hasn't been used yet, which is really hard to do.
Yeah, it's always kind of a letdown when you have an idea and then somebody's like, "Oh no, that was done in 1972 in this
Right.
obscure 4 issue run." It's like, yeah, it's always a challenge, even though you're not like actively looking for inspiration from things. There's, this is an industry that's seen thousands and thousands of ideas come through over the decades, and it's really hard to come up with an original idea, even though you're not like stealing or copying other ideas. It's just just the sheer happenstance of like other of thousands of other creative people thinking about the
And I
same
think
sorts
what's
of problems.
pretty interesting about the Psychoverse is that in the Psychoverse, if anything is possible when it's dreamed up in the Matterverse, what does that mean for the residents of the Psychoverse, that they're dependent on the Matterverse so much for kind of their existence? And what does that say about like the permanence of their own lives, where it was again, it's dependent on Matterverse thinking of it or imagining it to come into theirs?
Well, they see the Matterverse as thieves because things that exist in the Psychoverse disappear from the Psychoverse once they're invented in the Matterverse, and they and people, when they die in the Matterverse, come to live in the Psychoverse, which makes them even more annoying to the people of the Psychoverse.
So if things exist in the Matterverse, I mean the Psychoverse, until Matterverse invents it, once again, what does that say psychologically for the Psychoverse to know that at any moment whatever they're interacting with could be gone, at any moment?
Yeah, I think that's why they have this view of the Matterverse as being this domain of thieves, because in fact there's a scene in the Psychoverse where a guy is eating a meal with a knife fork. It's a fork and a knife all in one utensil, and then somebody in the Matterverse invents the knife fork and it disappears out of his hand while he's in the middle of his meal. So they've created the system in the Psychoverse that when people go to the Psychoverse, they are judged, and if they are found not worthy of living in the Psychoverse, they are destroyed. Which is, and then once you're destroyed in the Psychoverse, you just kind of like are gone forever, gone from memory and everything, just sort of dissipated into the eons of the universe.
In the story, so the Matterverse people, I guess, would be regular people, are the villains of the Psychoverse. Do they view them as the adversary? Are there, what is it about the Psychoverse that they're going after the Matterverse say about them as well? Are they the heroes or villains of this story?
The villains in this story are a group of radicals in the Psychoverse called the Psycho Nuns, who are part of an order that judges people when they come into the Psychoverse to decide whether or not they're worthy of living in the Psychoverse. And they take it upon themselves to go back into the Matterverse and find the Dark Incal, and they will destroy entire worlds to find it. So they're the villains of the story, and the heroes of the story are basically the characters that we know from the Incal, who are, conversely trying to find the Psycho Nuns or otherwise get a hold of the
if
Incal.
the Psycho Nuns are determining who's worthy to be in the Psychoverse, by what metric are they measuring this?
Basically the level of destructiveness by which they lived in the Matterverse. So it is sort of like a religious afterlife scenario where people are seeking judgment, or people are judged based upon their behaviors, but their behaviors are not really necessary based on some sort of objective, standard of good and evil. It's more just kind of like, what will this person be more of a pain in the Psychoverse than they're worth?
So, the story states that the Psychoverse is a spiritual realm, while the Matterverse is like a more greedy realm. So, is this difference circumstantial? Yeah. In other words, because the Psychoverse has more possibilities that they can afford to be less greedy, or is it says something about the Matterverse that they are like this?
No, I think that's exactly it. I think the people in the Psychoverse tend to be more spiritual and less materialistic, just by virtue of the nature of their existence, where there is no scarcity, and and they live on the spiritual plane, whereas obviously the people in the material universe are going to be more materialistic. But this has negative connotations for both for both sets of beings. For the people in the Metaverse, they tends to make them petty and greedy and cruel, whereas the people in the Psychoverse, it tends to make them sort of judgmental and holier than thou and moralizing. Which is really, in a way, sort of an examination of the human soul and how hard it is to maintain yourself as a generous, sort of open person, given the competing demands of your soul and your material.
So, how aware
existence.
of the Psychoverse is the people in the Metaverse?
Okay. They're not aware. They have no idea this realm exists until the psycho nuns show up and start destroying everything.
Because they don't know the Psychoverse, or let's say when they learn about it because of the psycho nuns, how massive will this change the society of the Metaverse, knowing that this other realm that they have a direct impact on is right there? I mean, does that mean they're going to be more concerned, or are they going to be more like, fuck it?
Well, not everyone finds out. It's there, planets start going missing, and they're trying to figure out why. This is what starts this hunt that leads them to the psycho nuns and the Psychoverse. But nobody really finds out about the Psychoverse until they pass into it, and the beings in the Psychoverse live under the strict rule that once you're in the Psychoverse, you cannot pass back into the Metaverse. Which the psycho nuns, being this radical sect of psycho nuns, decides that they have to break that rule in order to save the Dark Incal and save existence itself from the threat of the Dark Incal and the Luminous Incal meeting. They take it upon themselves to break the one cardinal rule of the Psychoverse, which is that you cannot return to the Metaverse, and they do. And so it's not that everybody in the Metaverse is suddenly aware of these people. It's that there's this group of terrorists from the spirit realm that have come with the cause, and they're just relentless until they do what they've come to accomplish. So the people who are directly opposing them find out that this is what's happening, but the public at large just knows that planets are going missing.
So with the psycho nuns, do they, from their perspective, are they noble, or do they view themselves as being people who are doing inherently good for Psychoverse, or maybe some of the Metaverse, or do they see what's actually going on, which is, once again, they are participants in this, in carnage, because they're killing those who they don't think belong, things of that nature?
Yeah, the story follows three psycho nuns in particular, like the cell of psycho nuns, and they are completely convinced of their own justification, that not only is the Metaverse have no right to exist, but they're the only ones in the Psychoverse who are taking their cause seriously. They're the only ones who are taking the cause of furthering existence seriously, and that everybody else is sort of an apostate. It operates very much like a cult or a radicalized.
So how deeply into their belief system will the stories delve into?
Not super deeply. I mean, everything I've just told you is explained in the pages, but it's more about the people in the Metaverse trying to solve the mystery, and also trying to find what it is that gives their existence meaning, in despite the fact that so many of these psycho nuns complaints about the Metaverse are actually really correct.
So from a certain perspective, they actually are kind of the good guys.
Yeah, it's one of these things where it's like they're the villains, but they also have a point. You can understand where they're coming from, and they have a legitimate complaint. But you have to find meaning in a universe that, despite its imperfections, and I think this is the sort of thing that their fundamentalism.
You said they're responsible for destroying entire planets. So, I mean,
yes,
and it could be, are they just indifferent to the death toll that they're causing? And
well, the rationale is that the Incal is on one of these planets. So if they just destroy the entire planet, the Incal will return to the spirit realm. will return to the Psychoverse. So they just go around destroying entire planets, as like a sort of a fishing net tactic for finding the Dark Incal. But yeah, they tell themselves that it's okay because the people in the Metaverse will probably just destroy themselves anyway.
So,
why not?
So those, when you die in the Metaverse, you go to the Psychoverse, right? So how do they feel about this massive influx of people coming to the Psychoverse that's due to their destruction?
It's sort of like coming into a customs in a foreign country where they put you into like little lines, and then they have somebody at a window sort of like look at your paperwork and then either let you in or visa denied, in which case you're beheaded.
Oh, that's awesome.
Killed forever.
And I mean, I had the pleasure of reading the issue, and I mean, the art is absolutely incredible. When you were seeing what the artwork looked like, how excited did that make you, and how confident that make you to continue with it?
It's brilliant artwork. Yannick Paquette does the art, and I was just floored by it. And, again, this sort of illustrates what I was talking about earlier about how the creative pressure is actually a good thing, because I'm sure Yannick saw what Moebius had done with the Incal and thought that's where the bar is. And I think it really caused him to just make not to think, well, I got to copy Moebius, but I've got to come up with Moebius level creativity in my own way. And I think that's really what he's nailed, is that he's approached this universe from a way that's unique to him, but that matches the level of intense creativity.
I mean, Paquette, I know the artist. He's a longtime veteran of comic books. When you're working with someone who's a veteran like that, what does that allow for you? I mean, in either how you prepare your scripts for him, what you trust for him to do on the page.
Yeah, exactly. I think that when you're working with someone you trust like that, and I've worked with him before, so I know what he does. And what that allows you to do is to give the artist less information and more free reign. So, for example, I'll break my scripts into multiple panels per page, but with the proviso that you don't need to follow any of this. If you want to do this in a splash page, you can do it in a splash page. If you want to divide this into more panels, you can do that. I trust you. This is just the information I need to be on this page. And also, yeah, you tend to give them more freedom to create the look. You include less sort of micromanaging details on the costumes and the appearance of the characters, because you want them to dazzle you.
Some writers, I imagine, it's hard to let go of their, of control to an artist like that, because once again, you have worked with them before. Was it easy to do that? And also, when it hasn't been an artist that you've known before, have you found that difficult with less veteran artists?
Yeah, something I try to do with every artist now is to have a chat and go over some early drawings before they start committing anything, so you're not wasting a lot of their time. But yeah, I think the challenge when you're working with a new artist is to figure out how much or how little information they want. Because some artists are if you're not giving me enough information, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. And other people are you're giving me way too much information, and this is just not fun for me because I'm not creating my own thing. Yeah. I'm just drawing what you're writing. And you need to kind of figure out where that level is of micromanaging information you need to give. Some artists really like a lot of it. Some don't like very much of it. So what I tend to do, especially when I'm working with a new artist, is I tend to give a lot of information, but with the understanding that this is all just an advisory. If you don't want to follow this, or if you have a different idea you like better, go with that. And this is just the way I'm just telling you what's happening in my mind. And you're the artist, you're the director of this movie. You can take that or leave
I think that's awesome. And I think that also creates a better relationship with the artist. Because I do my own indie comic books, and having worked with some artists when things didn't work out, when they're not happy, you definitely know it.
Yeah. No, it's the same way I react when, somebody gives me 30 continuity driven changes I have to make to my script. It's well, why am I even writing this if I'm just doing something that's completely, been written before? And that's probably the same way an artist feels when you try to like complete, it's like this panel will be 1.5 inches, by 1.5 inches, and it needs to contain a picture that looks exactly like this. Where's the fun in that? And so I think, yeah, you have to find the happy medium where they get enough information that they are inspired, but not so much that you completely destroyed the creativity of what they would bring.
I think it reminds me, there was, on the very small indie level, it's hard to get paid writing gigs. I mean, it's just difficult. And I remember this one gig I got, the payment, I can't remember how much it was. And he gave me, it's like, to write the story, here's 400 pages of written story that you need to use. I was like, I'm good. Not we've worth them. I'm not approaching this shit. That's well below, that's well above the amount of work I want to put in and kind of thing I want to get stuck with to write this guy's story. So I think at that point, it's like I just said, you know what? Good luck. I wish you luck. Do what you got to do. I don't ever have it about, but it's unfortunate when creativity is stifled. And I imagine having worked with DC Comics and things of that nature, have you been in a situation ever where you felt it was stifling? Now you learned to kind of let go a little bit.
Well, I think that you begin to learn which battles are important, like which things are worth fighting for and which things just to give in. When I started, I just felt like every battle was important. I just exhausted myself. And I realized it doesn't really matter, whether this character is wearing, this outfit or that outfit. What matters is that the story tells reveals the thing about this character that I want to talk about. And so I've gotten to the point where I will give in on battles I don't think are necessary. I will save my energy for the battles that matter and give in to continuity on the details that I think don't really make a difference to what I'm trying to say.
Have you determined do matter to you?
Well, I think those are the ones that are really crucial to what I'm trying to say with this. Like a lot of times when I'm writing a series, it's based upon some parable for something I have in mind. So if they want me to completely abandon the central theme that I was writing about, or the parable that the story was trying to illustrate, that's a battle I will fight. But if it's like a detail or just some sort of logistical thing, well, it's like we can't have characters swear because this is a rated teen comic. And I'm just like, okay, well, whatever.
Another character in the story, and I think he goes across a lot of the titles, is John DeFool. Am I pronouncing that right? DeFool. So what role does he play in the series? And is he a hero of this story? Is he a hero of any of the stories? And like, what's your perspective of this character?
He's sort of a chaotic neutral character. I guess you'd say he's not the hero, but he is sort of the protagonist. He plays an important role despite his own ineptitude. But that's kind of it. He kind of stumbles into his role in this story as he did in his role, the original Incal. And it kind of explains how he stumbled into the role of that story, too. It sort of explains why John DeFool kind of happened to be the one who ended up with the Dark Incal in the original story, or the Luminous Incal.
So because he's the one who does show up in multiple other titles, is he then more difficult to write because once again other writers are also using him as well?
Yeah, I don't think he's difficult to write. I think in a way it makes him more fun to write because this is a character you don't have to create from scratch, and he's like kind of a funny sort of holy fool character, which is always really fun to write. So he's not a character that you have to like worry. It's not like Superman or something where it's like he has to act a certain way at all times because he's so goofy. There's a lot of liberty in writing John DeFool, and I absolutely found him like one of the most fun characters that I've written to write, and I would love to write him again.
So what role does Meta Baron and is it Saloon?
Saloon, yeah, which is a combination of sun and moon, because Saloon is in the vernacular of their world an androgyne, meaning the Saloon is equal parts male and female. And yeah, the Saloon is on one of the planets that gets destroyed by the Psycho Nuns, which is what brings the Meta Baron into the story, because Meta Baron at this point believes that Saloon is his child, and so he wants to find who's responsible for this and figure out what happened to Saloon, and that's what draws him into the story as sort of like this hard-boiled detective who's also the greatest sort of mercenary in the universe.
So are their fates meant to follow the same fate as Meta Baron and Agora? So Meta Baron and the way they're set up in the issue, are they meant to follow the similar fate as Meta Baron? I think it's Agora.
Yeah, the Agora actually makes an appearance in this story, and it's one of the reasons why Saloon wants the Order of the Meta Barons to just sort of die out, because she sees this as just a barbaric way to raise a family, and Saloon is right. Which sort of sets up the conflict, because the Meta Baron wants to then abandon the Meta Baron Order too, in order to be something that Agora wasn't able to be, which is a father. He wants to be a father to Saloon, but then Saloon is taken from him by the Psycho Nuns. So that's kind of what sets off.
Can the Meta Baron become that father and not deal with the situation of the Psycho Nuns? In other words, I mean, is he, because of the situation, is he now trapped to maintain that same lifestyle?
Yes, that's the crux, that he wanted to give up being a warrior in order to be a father to Saloon, but now that Saloon has been taken by the Psycho Nuns, the only way he can be a father to Saloon is by being the warrior.
It sounds it sounds like sort of like almost like the tragedy of the Meta Baron on some level, because you know
yeah, there is definitely a very he is the most tragic figure in the series, I think, in a way kind of the most compelling, but yeah, it is very much the story of the Meta Baron is very much
if the story were if Meta Baron's life was supposed to maintain the way it was, and Saloon was captured by the Psycho Nuns, was Saloon destined to fight Meta Baron at some point? And is that known? And how does that affect that relationship then?
That, is something they both agreed that they don't want. And this is something that this is why Meta Baron is trying to give up the life of the Meta Baron, because he doesn't want to have, he remembers having to kill Agora and how badly that destroyed him, and he doesn't want to put Saloon through the same experience. But all the skills that sort of traumatized him, that traumatized him in gaining, becoming the world's greatest warrior, becoming the Meta Baron, he now has to use to save Saloon, even though he swore to give him up.
Is Psychoverse as a miniseries, is it ongoing?
It's a miniseries.
5 issues.
5 issues.
When can our listeners be able to get these issues?
That's a good question. I might get this wrong. I thought they said September.
Well, like I said, I mean, I think it's definitely going to look forward. Is it going to be distribution, Diamond, or whatever, all local comic shops, I imagine?
Yeah, I think it'll just be the normal distribution. I'm assuming they use that, but I don't.
Like I said, I think it sounds like an awesome concept. Psychoverse, like I said, it does sound like something I've not heard before, and that's always kind of exciting when you hear something. You're like, "Huh, that's a new concept." I like going that well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really the only way to get a comic book greenlit in the Jodorowsky is well, what can you say that he hasn't said already? And I think, so I'm gratified that this is something that people are kind of
and I definitely think they will be. I want to thank you, Mr. Russell, so much for coming on the show. It was a great pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to seeing what Psychoverse has to offer.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.